All right. If you remember, by the way, I think if I don't just get hung up, I think we'll finish the chapter today. Ooh, did I just say that? But I did caveat that with if I don't get hung up. If you remember, though, back a couple of chapters in chapter 19, verse 28, that's after the episode of the rich young ruler. Jesus has a little sit down with his disciples because Peter asks, hey, we gave up everything. What's in it for us? And he says, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, don't you know, when he said that, they went, ooh, I like. Now, Jesus, that's talk I like. Let me hang on to that. Lost on them was the lesson that they just learned about the rich young ruler. Lost on them was all that talk about humbling yourselves and working for God. Lost on them was the subsequent parable that Jesus talked. Remember, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. You've been working for a long time, but don't expect any more glory, honor, or kudos than the person who might have come at the very end. And we talked last week about that person who come at the very end might just well have been that rich young ruler. Just to kind of encapsulate that whole teaching, that whole idea. But seemingly, that was lost on them. Hearing about those thrones and judging and judging the tribes, their imagination just started to spin up. And they were getting eager and they were getting excited about what was about to happen. Where were they going? Where were they headed? Jerusalem. They were headed to Jerusalem. And we'll talk, not next week, but maybe the week after when I'm back, we'll talk about something really, really big that was getting their excitement going. Okay? But they're going to Jerusalem. They're going with Jesus. They have just been told that they're going to sit on thrones. Now, don't you know they were kind of stirred up? Jesus was going to claim his throne, and guess who gets to sit next to him? And so Jesus has to say, back up, boys. I can just hear the exasperation in his voice here. But he's like, okay, let's get down to this. Let me tell you yet again. He's already told them twice, documented. But let me tell you again, Jesus was going up to Jerusalem. On the way, this is verse 17 of chapter 20. On the way, he took the 12 aside and said to them, we're going up to Jerusalem. Yeah. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Okay, so that's when he's going to show himself to be honored, and that's when he's going to show himself to be the Messiah. Oh, this is good. They will condemn him to death. Oh, wait. What did you just say? Back up. That wasn't in the plan. They will condemn him to death, hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked, flogged, and crucified, and on the third day he will be raised to life. And you know what? Those thrones, they're still blocking the view. They're still getting in the way. Because we'll read in verse 20, it just keeps going. But let's talk about this part for a sec. They're going up to Jerusalem. Up. Why up? Jerusalem is south, right? In our language, Jerusalem, if you go south, you go down. You go down to the south, right? But Jerusalem, in a couple of respects, is up. One respect is it's on a mountain. And where are they? They're still in the valley. They're still in the Jordan Valley. Now, the Jordan Valley, if you are at ground zero, if you are at ocean level, sea level, the Jordan Valley is down here, 900 feet below sea level. Okay, that's where, in fact, that's where Jericho sits, 900 feet below sea level. You have to go up to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is 2,500 feet, thereabouts, 2,400 feet, 2,500 feet above sea level. So, 17 miles, this road from Jericho to Jerusalem is up. Here's another thing. If you start out over here at the Mediterranean Sea, you're going to go up, up. Any way you get to Jerusalem, you're going to go up. Okay, so you always went up to Jerusalem. Here's another thing about going up. Where does God sit in the Jewish mind? Where does God live? In the temple. Up. You go up to meet God. You don't go down to meet God. You go up to meet God. So not only was it, what's the word? Not geologically, but not even geographically. Topographically. Not only is it topographically higher up, but it's also spiritually higher up. So they're going up to Jerusalem. See, it's those things that take my time. I spend too much time on little things like that. But I like those things. So they're going up to Jerusalem. And the Son of Man will be delivered over. Now, there is a lot of debate about that. But generally speaking, most scholars believe delivered over is akin to what? What happens to Jesus? By Judas. Betrayed. So a lot of people, a lot of scholars believe that delivered over is equivalent to betrayed. The Son of Man will be betrayed to or delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Then they will, and here's the interesting thing, they will condemn him to death. The Roman law did not allow them to condemn people to death. Well, let me say the Roman law did not allow them to put people to death. They had to ask for that to happen by the Romans, by the hands of the Romans at that point. Now, that changed. They used to be able to do that, but that changed. I can't remember the date, but somewhere around, I want to say, well, I can't remember the date, and I don't want to be wrong. But Rome took away their privilege to put people to death, which is funny. Because do you remember the episode where in John they bring the woman caught in adultery and they're all standing there with stones? They couldn't do that if they wanted to. Rome wouldn't have allowed it. Interesting, isn't it? Anyway. They did. They did stone Stephen. I wonder how that worked. They got away with something, didn't they? All right. Stone Stephen. So, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the Jewish religious people, would condemn him to death. Jesus is still telling the disciples this. They will hand him over to the Gentiles, that would be the Romans, to be mocked, flogged, and crucified. Now, this is the first time that Jesus has told them how he's going to die. He's told them two other times he's going to die. But this is the first time that I remember he's told them the means with which he's going to die. And crucifying, they understood what crucifixion was. They understood what it represented. It was actually a criminal's punishment. And so Jesus is telling them a little bit about how he's going to be viewed, how he's going to be perceived, the kinds of judgments and trials that he's going to have to go through, and the mocking and the flogging. Now, where are your thrones? Okay? Jesus is trying to get through to them. This is about to happen. Boys, we're not going back to Galilee. We're going up to Jerusalem. This is about to happen. Okay? Oh, and he says this 3 times. On the 3rd day, he will be raised to life. Now, the last time we read that, it says they were confused about what on earth he was talking about. Because, why? This idea of resurrection, though theological, was not practical in their heads. It was just such a supernatural thing, they couldn't grasp that idea. In fact, there were arguments among Jewish leaders whether resurrection existed, right? Sadducees didn't believe in it. Pharisees did. But Jesus here is telling these disciples, I'm going to be raised to life. And they're probably going, what is that? I don't. Short circuit. does not compute. They've seen him do it. Now, here's the difference. He was the actor. He raised people to life. But if he's the one dead, how does he get raised? Who's bigger than Jesus? I don't understand that. In their minds, they're going, I don't get it. Jesus can do it, but who's going to raise Jesus if Jesus is dead? So I can see, in my head, I can see how they could get confused. How does that work? And when we don't understand something, even in today, our natural propensity is not to dig into it, it's to go, whatever, not sure what that even means. And you move on. Don't we? Don't we? I think so. I naturally do. There are times when I do dig into it, but it's because I have a keen interest in it. I want to overcome that misunderstanding. But they still have thrones. So they're like, I don't get that. Yeah, okay. Let's go back to the throne part. I like that part. All right. So Jesus has told them a third time what's going to happen. And he's really trying to get them ready for it. It's like, I can't get through to you. You know how you take your kid's face, look at me. I'm telling you this. I want you to understand. I can just see Jesus trying to do that in his head. I need you to grasp this. So, verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons. Who on earth is that? Who is the mother of Zebedee's sons? Well, we get a little bit of a thing here, Zebedee's sons, and then it says, actually it doesn't say here, does it? We find in other places the mother of Zebedee's sons. Zebedee's sons are James and John. James and John, the son of Zebedee. If we overlay, oh, look at that, I missed a part. Do I want to go back? Let me just say this. This was a long route up. If you're traveling with your family and you have your teenage kids with you, you get about here. Well, unless you're with Chase, he'd already be up here. We'd be back here. He'd be all the way up here. But you get about here and they start grumbling and complaining, right? Oh, are we there yet? It's so hard. Uphill all the way. So what they would do is they would sing songs. There are songs called Psalms of Ascent, and we know a few of them. Psalms 24 was one of them. And it talks about going up to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, open your gates, and be magnified. So there were songs that they would sing on that trip. I just kind of wanted to drop that in. So, all right. James and John and Mama. Okay. James and John were the sons of Zebedee. If we read Mark 15, verse 40. Let me flip over there right quick. Mark 15. This is when Jesus is on the cross. There are some ladies that are watching from afar, from a distance it says. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, not James and John, James the younger and Joseph, and Salome. So these were named. Overlay that with what we see in Matthew 27, the same event. Matthew 27, they're still at the cross. Verse 56. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Okay? So, if we overlay those two passages, we see that this woman's name likely was Salome. This was probably Salome that we're talking about. And Zebedee's sons were James and John. So Salome was the mother of James and John. Some scholars think, and I'm gonna tread on some thin ice here, but I want to introduce this to you because if you happen to look through this, if you research this, you're going to encounter it, and you're going to go, huh? Because I did. I can't certify it. I'm not going to lick it and stick it. But I want to tell you what a lot of scholars think and why they think it. To me, it doesn't quite pass the muster. But some scholars, many scholars, in fact many texts, say that Salome was Jesus' aunt. Whew, I got some looks. Yeah. If we read the same scenario in John, I believe it's the same scenario, John 19. Many people will actually say Salome was Mary's sister. Okay? John 19:25. John 19 doesn't have 25 verses. Let me find where it is. Does? Oh, 25. Oh, I'm looking at 45. Okay, 25. Let me figure out what I'm doing. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, that's Jesus' mother, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. Okay, so the other two passages named or recognized this other person named Salome, or this other person named, or that was said, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. This passage just says Mary's sister. So, was this the same person? We don't know. We don't know. But some people overlay these and go, oh, that must be Salome. Okay? Throughout history, there are early church writers, there are scholars in the Renaissance era that point back to this and try to affirm this idea. You could go back to Origen. Origen wrote all sorts of weird things. Origen was he was a writer in the 2nd century, which would be the 300s. Third century. Third century is the 200s. Third century is the 200s, so he was in the 3rd and early 4th century, I believe. But he was a writer in Alexandria. Alexandria was well known at that time for allegory. And so Origen wrote a lot of very interesting things that we don't believe are true, but it really reveals a lot about how people at that time in that location thought. What was their philosophical thought? That's how we get, or where we get, a lot of things like, you remember the Gnostic scriptures, the Nag Hammadi library that was discovered in the mid-1900s. Comes from a lot of this time period. And there was a lot of strange philosophical thoughts come out of the Nag Hammadi library. Was that a question? No? Okay. So it seems to be that this idea that Salome was Mary's mother, or Mary's sister, has been perpetuated through the years. I do appreciate scholars today mentioning it, but not affirming it. A lot of scholars, if you read the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, ISBE, it mentions it. And it says some scholars believe this. But it doesn't go through why and how and that sort of thing. I appreciate that because it does enlighten me that there are people that think in certain ways. I don't think, the people who don't say, some people say, well, this is not Mary's sister, this is Mary's sister-in-law. So this is Joseph's sister. There are some people that even go so far as to say this is Joseph's daughter, Jesus' sister, from another marriage, pre-marriage of Joseph. Again, I think that doesn't hold muster. I don't think you can actually come to that conclusion if you're an honest researcher. But I just want to lay it out there for you because you're going to encounter those thoughts, those ideas as you dig into this. We do not know necessarily what relationship Salome had to Mary, if any, and I won't acknowledge any. I'll acknowledge that people think that, and I can see why they may take that step if you overlay the John passage. But there's nothing that says those couldn't be two different people. Okay? When it talks about Mary's sister and it talks about Salome, one place versus another, nothing says those could be two. Those could be two completely separate people. But I just wanted to lay that out there. She comes. Get back to Matthew 20. Matthew 20. So the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down. Now, before I go further, this is why I can't make progress. I don't think this was her idea. Why do I think that? Because Jesus talks, well, there's a couple of reasons. First off, you go to Mark, and it doesn't even mention mother. It just says James and John came. So that's one reason. The other reason is when Jesus responds, Jesus does not respond to mom. Jesus responds to the boys. So I think they may have brought mama into it, because who can say no to mama? Right? You don't want to say no to mama. So mama brings the boys. Kneeling, asks a favor. Jesus says, "What do you want?" She said, "Grant that one of these two sons may sit on your right hand and the other on your left in the kingdom." Those thrones come back. It's those darn thrones again. Jesus, when we set up that throne in that throne room, all those 12 thrones that are by yours, can you put James on one side and John on the other? Special places. We want to be nearest, and we want to be the most honored of your helpers. Okay. Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. You still have this idea of thrones in your head. You don't know what you're asking. I just told you what's going to happen to me. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Yep, we can. No, honestly, we don't know what their perspective was. We don't know how sincere. I think they felt they were sincere, but we don't know how sincerely they understood. How, I play them off as goofy because it all just sounds goofy. But they said, yes, we can. Now, was it both of them? Or did James do the talking? There are times, and we're going to see this maybe today. See, I'm getting going and I'm not going to get to the end. There are times when two people are engaged with another person, but only one is the real spokesperson. This may be one of those times. Okay? This might be Mama is there because James wanted this, and Mama wasn't going to let James get it without John getting a piece of the pie too. Okay? So Jesus says, you will indeed drink from my cup. But to sit at my right and my left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. What was Jesus' cup? What was this cup? Sacrificial death, especially by one who didn't deserve death. Rejection and punishment by God as penalty for or payment for sin. If we're talking the entire cup, see, we have bad days, but God has not left us in our bad days. God has not turned his back on us in our bad days. When Jesus was on the cross, he made God vomit. He said, I can't handle that. Why? Because all of the world's sin was placed on Jesus. And God and sin don't mesh. My God, why have you forsaken me? So I think, oftentimes, even in communion, we talk about the death. We talk about the blood. And that's bad. I mean, it's not bad that we talk about it. The death is bad. But do we understand there's more than the death? In order for him to be punished, to take our punishment, it was more than death. He had to endure the punishment, the spiritual death, the denial of God, the distancing of God. We don't know what that feels like. We have no idea what that feels like. That was the cup. Are you able to drink from the cup? Actually, what did he say? He said, are you able to drink the cup? And to me, and I may be reading more into this, but to me, that's the entire cup. Can you do that? Can you drink this entire cup? Yes, we can. Well, guess what? You will drink from the cup. You're going to have a sip of the same kind of thing. Because, one, you're not worthy, and two, you're not able to drink the whole cup. But you're going to get a taste of the cup. And that taste comes, we see James is the first of the disciples to be martyred, right? We see that in Acts chapter 12. He's run through with the sword. There are stories about John. There's a story about John that he was boiled in oil, but in the same story he was saved from death in that burning. And then he subsequently went to Patmos. The Isle of Patmos was generally, we think, was used for a prison colony in Rome. And so we think that John might have been sent there. But at the same time, we think he was released, possibly because of old age, and he died a peaceful death in Ephesus. We don't really know, but that's what we understand. Now, for me, in my thinking, I question whether he was ever on Patmos physically. Because it does say he was caught up and the Lord put him on Patmos. You know, there are ways the Spirit can work and take us to places that we didn't put our feet on. So we don't know that Patmos experience. You know, that's the place where he received the revelation that he wrote about. So we don't know about John, but this is why I wonder if James is really the instigator of this conversation, because James absolutely not only tasted the cup, but he was the first of the disciples to taste the cup. Interesting. Regardless, that's just me thinking. When the 10 heard about this, now don't you know they were just frustrated because they just don't, those two boys don't understand. Jesus just told us that it's not about these thrones. No. They're not mad at them because they don't understand. They don't understand themselves. We're told that they're continuing to argue about who's the greatest. They're just mad because James and John thought of it first. They got there first. And not just that, they took Mama. They're just all steamed up because they didn't get to Jesus first. The 10 heard about this. They were indignant with the two brothers. And Jesus called them together. All right, boys. Come here. Come here. My band director used to have this phrase, you know, how you do things one more time. Let's try it one more time. Well, when you do one more time again and again and again, he started saying one more time. Well, Jesus is saying one more time. Come here. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their officials, high officials, exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, so he's saying, those thrones I told you about, forget the thrones. Forget the thrones. Wish I'd never said that. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Now, has he ever said this before? Lots. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. A little bit of parallelism. Remember, he says it twice. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. One more time, boys. It's not who's the greatest. The one who tries to put himself first will be last. It's all about servant. It's all about service. It's all about work. It's all about humility. One more time. But those thrones. I keep going back to that. All right, so the lesson is over, and they're moving on. They are in the vicinity of Jericho. The next thing we see is they're going out of Jericho. Something that takes place before that, we read about in another gospel. Remember the story of Zacchaeus? That happened. Okay? So some things have happened in Jericho before we get to this next part. Verse 29. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. So, why a large crowd? The 2 points. The absolute 2 points. First off, he's been over in this area for a time, we don't know how long, performing miracles, teaching, and it says crowds came to him. Okay, we can see that. That was back in the beginning of 19. Verse 2, he left Galilee, verse 1, went to the region of Judea. Verse 2, large crowds followed him and he healed them there. Okay? Large crowds were already with him. The other thing, and what Don said, this was Passover time. What does that mean? Who goes to Jerusalem at Passover? Everybody. So this was a very highly trafficked road. Because you had all those Jews living up in Galilee coming this way. Then you had some people in Egypt. There were a couple of ways to get to Jerusalem. You could go along the Mediterranean Sea and then come up this way, or you could come around this way. So there were a lot of people coming from Egypt, and there were a lot of Jews who lived in Egypt. So they would come up this way, and they might cross over at Jericho. Lots of people coming to Jerusalem for Passover. We'll talk about that again in a couple of weeks. Okay? Because that is very important. Okay. Large crowd followed him. Now, 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside. Why were 2 blind men sitting by the roadside? Begging. When you were blind, you could not maintain a living. You could not sustain yourself, you could not sustain your family, and so you were reduced to begging. And what would happen is very often blind men would be, or beggars in general, would be around the city gates. Okay, somewhere around the city gates, because that's a very highly trafficked area. Not only that, this was Jericho. Remember what we said about Jericho? Who lived in Jericho? It was Herod really coveted Jericho. He wanted it. So did Cleopatra. Really rich people. Really rich people lived in Jericho. Not only good Jews, but also those bad Jews. Remember Zacchaeus? That happened down here. Zacchaeus was very wealthy, wasn't he? Lots of other people were very wealthy. Jericho was kind of the oasis city. It was the resort town. It was the leisure town. The place to be. And so that was a great spot for beggars, right? To be sitting. Not only that, but let's go back to the Passover thing. We talked way back in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. There were 3 primary tenets of Jewish practice. If you remember what those were, one was almsgiving, giving to the needy. Okay? Another was prayer, and another was fasting. It was like 3 legs to a chair. You had to have all three to be a good Jew. Almsgiving, even to this day, is very important to the Jews. That's why you see a lot of Jews, people of Jewish faith today, are very big, people who give money, philanthropists. There are a lot of Jewish philanthropists out there because the Jewish faith incorporates almsgiving as one of their major tenets. So these blind men, these blind beggars, were giving all of these hordes of people going to Jerusalem an opportunity to do good. Weren't they? Because they're going up to Jerusalem. You want to go to meet God. Well, you want to show yourself to be a good standing Jew, right? So what better than, let's help the beggars right before we get to Jerusalem. What an opportunity. So these beggars, these blind men, were on the roadside as they exited Jericho. And they heard that Jesus was going by, and they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Wait. Son of David. Now, this is not just Jesus, prophet of Galilee. Jesus, Lord, Son of David. What did they just call him? Messiah. How is it that these blind guys knew anything about Jesus? Remember where they were sitting? Near the gate. There's a lot of stuff that happens at the gate, including news. You want to bring news of Galilee? You tell it at the gate. So they're sitting at the gate and they're hearing about this Jesus. Not, who knows how long they've been there. It could have been years. Every day they'd come there and hear about this Jesus. Well, these guys also heard, or were, in my head anyway, good Jews, and they could put two and two together. So they had been taught, every good Jewish boy is taught, Jewish girls too, but every good Jewish boy is taught the Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. There is plenty of evidence by what Jesus did if you overlaid the activity of Jesus with what the Old Testament says the Messiah is going to be and do, to put two and two together and come out with four. Well, that's what they did. Not only that, they might have been guided by some spiritual insight. God may have helped them along as well. But it's fascinating to me that blind guys have more sight than people who could see. Interesting, isn't it? So they call out to Jesus, "Son of David, have mercy on us." And the crowd says, "Oh, shush. Who are you? You're just a beggar. This is someone important." Now, there are some scholars that say they were really wanting money. And if they could get Jesus to drop some coins in their bucket, how many people were following Jesus? So if Jesus dropped a couple, everyone's going to follow suit. They're going to go home rich. I don't know that that's what they thought, because it seems to be, anyway, in what Matthew records, their whole purpose is acknowledging Jesus for who he is and asking for sight. So I just wanted to say that's what scholars might say. It's not really the way the text reads. So the crowd rebuked them, told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus stopped and called them and said, "What do you want me to do?" Jesus does this a lot, doesn't he? He knows what we want. He wants us to acknowledge it. He wants us to voice it for our own benefit, as well as possibly for others. Okay? "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." They knew what Jesus was capable of. They'd heard it. They hadn't seen it, but they'd heard it. Not only that, they already acknowledged who he was. You're not just a miracle worker. You are Messiah. You are God. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight, and I love this, they followed him. That doesn't mean they became part of the crowd. They entered into fellowship with him. They became a disciple. They already believed who he was, and he helped them in a miraculous way. They're like, I'm attached to him. Okay, he's not losing me. If only we could be that way sometimes. Right? Right? If we read this same, there's a couple of things that I want to clean up here. If we read the same scenario, the same scene in Mark, or if we want to read it in Luke, both Mark and Luke have it as one person. In fact, one of them names him Bartimaeus. Well, isn't that a discrepancy between the Gospels? I don't think so, and here's why I don't think so. In the same way that I suggested that maybe James was the talker, James was the thinker, James was the one that brought the two sons into that conversation, there is usually one who is more outspoken than the other. In this case, there was likely one, Bartimaeus, who was more outspoken than the other. He's the one to whom Jesus naturally engaged. So Mark has no reason to put two in the picture. Luke has no reason to suggest that there were two. That's not even their intent because of who they wrote to. Who was Matthew writing to? Jews. Was it important for Matthew to indicate that there were two in this scenario? Absolutely. Why? Right. You had to have two for a testimony to hold up, to be true. Now, what did these blind men just do? Son of David, you're the Messiah. We need two people to confirm that testimony. So it's important for Matthew to say there were two because of who he was writing to. Not so important for Mark or Luke to indicate there were two. So I think there definitely could have been and probably were two. But Mark and Luke didn't need to suggest that. Matthew did. It was very important. We see the same thing. If we go back, you remember the demon-possessed man in the land of the Gadarenes? Legion was the demon's name. If we read Matthew, there were two people with the demons. But the other Gospels only have one. Why? Testimony of two. That demon said, Jesus, you're the Son of God. Matthew notes, that's what they said. And on that testimony, I've got to have two people as witnesses to that. So, I just wanted to lay that out. You're going to see what looks to be some inconsistency among the Gospels, but I want to say there's reason for that. And so that's possibly one of the reasons. Another thing that I want to suggest before we wrap up, and we are wrapping up in just a second, this episode, I think we've already seen before. This is not a new thing for us. If we go back to Matthew chapter 9, toward the end of Matthew chapter 9, verse 27, we see that Jesus went on from there, it says. And again, I told you some time ago, sometimes when it says Jesus went on from there, it just means, oh, and there's another thing I want to tell you. Two blind men were following and calling out, have mercy on us, Son of David. And then skipping down to 29, he touched their eyes and said, according to your faith, let it be done. And their sight was restored. And verse 31, they went out and spread the news about him all over that region. I would suggest, and I can't adamantly confirm this, but I would suggest that that's the same event that we're reading about right here in Matthew chapter 20. Why do I suggest that? I think Matthew 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are like the short version of Jesus' ministry. It's the abstract of Jesus' ministry, possibly even written at a separate time, a different time than the rest. But I think Matthew 5 through 9 is some documentation that was written, most likely by Matthew, about Jesus and his ministry, making the direct points that needed to be made, the specific things that occurred. Jesus taught, and it was what he taught, and we call that the Sermon on the Mount. And we talked about this before. I don't think the Sermon on the Mount was a single sermon, necessarily. Okay? And what he did, his activities. That's the summation. Matthew 5 through 9 is a summation of what he taught and what he did. That's my view. It's the way I look at it. I think that might be what I'm reading here. I'm just saying that. We see the same thing. If we want to look again at Matthew... Ooh, do I have this written down? I think I do somewhere. Let me see. Matthew 12, 22. You remember when Jesus got in trouble, like the really, really, really big contention that Jesus had with the Jews? Where he healed this demon-possessed man. So verse 22 of chapter 12, they brought him a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute. Okay? And Jesus healed him so that he could both talk and see. And look in verse 24. The Pharisees heard this and they said, it is only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons. We talked about at that time, that was the major contention. That's what actually pushed Jesus into a different style of ministry. And we talked about going into parables at that time. But that healing and them claiming that he was doing it by Beelzebub. Let's go back to Matthew 9. Is picking up right where we just dropped off. Verse 32. While they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk, that would be mute, could not talk, was brought to Jesus. And when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. And the crowd was amazed and said, nothing like this has ever happened in Israel. But, verse 34, the Pharisees said, it is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. Interesting. So did it happen twice? Or is it a restatement of the same occurrence? So this is one reason why I think that in the way that I read the whole scope of Matthew, 5 through 9 is one package set. And then starting at 10, we really get the extrapolated version. Okay, so that's what I think is going on here. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that what we see here in Matthew 20 might have already, we might have already seen in prior days. I know it's been a long time ago when we covered that. Next week I'll be gone. The week after, big week. If I can sum it up in the way that I think I want to sum it up, if I can validate in my head what I think I'm reading, and that's subject to change. It may deflate and I may say there's nothing there. But my studies so far and what I've seen, it could be a fun week to talk through. Because we're talking about Jesus going to Jerusalem. We're talking about Jesus entering Jerusalem. We're talking about how Jesus entered Jerusalem. We're talking about why he did it in the way he did it. We're talking about when he did it and why it mattered when he did it. Okay? Big week. And I hope it may be good that I have a week off, because I may need that time to gather my thoughts together. But I'm hoping it's going to be a pretty interesting week. not next week, but the week after. So we'll drop into chapter 21 when we're back into Matthew. And I appreciate Steve for picking up next week. Let's pray, and we will be dismissed. Lord, thank you for your word and all that we can glean from your word. And help us to encounter your word with open hearts and open minds. And help our thoughts be led to you. Help our attitudes be led to you. And help us to be fascinated by your word and your will. And help us to apply it in our lives. Help it to be practical to us. Father, it's really fun to think through how you used the authors that you used to reveal your will to us. And we pray that in the excitement that we have about it and the joy that we have gaining insight, that we not forget the seriousness that it carries, the truths that it carry. Thank you, Father, for the freedoms that we have in this world, in this nation. Thank you for the opportunities we have to open your word and to learn more of your will. And Father, as we're approaching Jerusalem and the story of Jesus' life, help us to also approach you. Help us to understand our own attitudes and our own dispositions, and help us to really understand how Jesus carried our sin to the cross. Help us to appreciate that all the more. Thank you for that gift. Thank you for the salvation because of that gift. It's through him we pray. Amen.